that type of stuff with automation and setting up your budget a certain way and maintaining it a certain way, all that is, at least to me, is peace of mind. You don't have to think about this shit. It's sent, it's automated. You already know that all the numbers are in your budget. Whatever it is, it's one less thing to think about.
What is up, you guys, and welcome back to the Duel the Day podcast, where we got our money and finance series here, episode 2. We're going to be walking Steve through the basics of budgeting. And to touch on what we covered last week, real quick, we talked a little bit about just the mindset around money, right? It's important to establish and figure out what our invisible scripts or what our limiting beliefs are surrounding money before we can actually take steps forward to be able to set up the right things in place that we're going to be going through, starting off with this episode and the next couple coming forward. And the duel of the day we had for you guys last week was just finding your resource or your framework, that person or that company that you feel comfortable learning from, and being able to really start to tap into what your current money mindset is and finding those steps to create what your new money mindset can be to unlock the full potential that you have to take control of your personal finances. So since we know your time is valuable, we're going to get right into this one here. Nico's going to lay out some info on Steve, who we set up last week 2 weeks ago as our, guinea pig for this finance series. So Nico's going to walk you through some of the budgeting here, and we're going to get going and let's get after it.
Yeah, dude. So if you didn't join us in our previous episode, we talked about Steve. He's our fictitious person that we're going to use for financial examples here. And Steve is a guy making $50,000 a year, and he just got his first job out of college. So we're already assuming that Steve is starting to cultivate a money mindset. And what we want to focus on in this episode is more of the detailed aspects of of his budget. And what I would tell Steve is the first thing he needs to do is figure out what you're spending your money on. I mean, you can do this a couple of ways. You can do this kind of by feel. You don't necessarily have to take a look and write down every tiny little penny, but you can. So you can do one of two things. Map out kind of a ballpark budget. Say, I think I spent X amount on food. I think I spent X amount on gas, that type of stuff, utilities, all that jazz. And then give those round numbers, put those round numbers in your budget and see where your money is going. I think that's a good way to just get a big picture of where your money's going, what that looks like. And that helps you understand, okay, maybe I'm spending too much in this area. I need to spend less here so I can save more. Yada, yada, yada. So now, obviously, you can go into the finer detail, open up your bank statement and go through all the expenditures and put them into categories. And really, what I would suggest to anyone starting off a budget is don't get too specific. You need to be specific, but don't get too specific. I don't know if you think differently, Tyler, but like anytime you get way too specific, it just gets really difficult to track. So
yeah, I agree, because I've done that. Like I've had the aha moments of, all right, I am taking control today of my money, and I get lost in the spreadsheet. I go hard 2-3 days. I'm tracking everything. Oh, this feels great, and then one day you forget or say, oh, I'll do it a little bit later, and then the next day, and it just kind of compounds, and then you're back to square zero. So it's super important just to figure out like what's going to be sustainable for you. What is the best way to go about that? Because I think one of the things that I read this past week in a book that I'll share the title a little bit later is doing something 85% of the way is much better than 0%. So it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be this overwhelming task of like, oh man, I'm going to start this budget. It's going to take me 4 hours to get everything in place and figure out how to manage everything. Doing something that just isn't perfect, but it's something that lets you start building on and gets the ball rolling, is going to be so much more valuable to you in the game of finance than, and I mean, anything else too, than just getting crippled at the starting line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And to avoid getting crippled, again, don't get too nitty gritty with the details. I think if after Steve has set up his budget, he's done it for 4 to 6 months or something like that, and he has an idea of a really good idea of where his money is going, maybe he can get a little bit more detailed in certain sections if he wants to get more granular on where his money is going and what he's spending it on. But to start, don't have like a food and a drink line. Just do food, and like food and drink go into that. Do gas, do phone, internet. All your subscriptions can go under the same thing. If you have a car payment, rent, or mortgage, also say utilities, that's in there. If you have any like hobbies that you're into, like Steve, at least for our purpose, is going to be into golf, so he's probably going to have a line for golf. And then miscellaneous, and literally like that's the base what I would do to start off. You might have a few more rows than that, but that's what I would recommend for Steve, because then after a couple months he's going to really know where his money is going, and if he sees really big expenses or numbers in his miscellaneous row, okay, maybe he can look at those in a little bit more detail and see where that money is going. And I would also recommend for Steve to put in notes to your Excel sheet anytime you have like an expense that isn't normal, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, trying to think of one off the top of my head, like
if your entire family has birthdays in May,
yeah.
like that's obviously that's going to be a little reoccurring, but that's not a specific monthly line item, right?
Or like I had to go to Florida last minute and no one was able to pick me up from the airport, so I had to pay for an Uber. That's a random miscellaneous expense, right? So I put in a note for that because it wasn't like free, obviously, but it's so like just so I make sure I know, like, okay, I spend that much money on something that I wasn't expecting or isn't normal. So I would tell Steve to split it up like that and just be consistent with how he's putting his money into the spreadsheet. And I think the initial goal is just to track money. Very quickly after you start tracking, your next goal should be to save money or to make sure you are saving money month to month. You don't want to be spending more money than you're taking in, right? So making sure that you're in the black, kind of a second important step there. Because then once you understand that, if Steve understands exactly how much he's spending month to month, okay, now we can look at what does he want to do hobby wise? Is there a passion that he wants to get into? Is there something he wants to save up for to spend on? That type of stuff. So I think just to start, that's what I would recommend to set up. Do you have anything else to point out?
Yeah, and I think just to give some numbers for you guys too, is I think a great starting framework, and correct me if I'm a little off on percentages here, but I think if you to map out your categories, or just like your bigger categories, like you've got what your take home pay is, you've got your fixed expenses, you have your investing, your saving, and then your spending money, your guilt-free spending money. It's stuff that could be hobby related or treating people to lunch or whatever you want to do with that. So the way that I've seen those percentages broken up is as a starting point, somewhere around 60% of your take-home pay is going to go towards your fixed expenses, right? It's going to be your rent or mortgage, cell phone, internet. You can loop in groceries and gas and stuff into that. Utilities, obviously, those things that don't change, those things that are basic. I shouldn't call cell phone, internet basic needs, but nowadays it kind of is. So you've got the fixed expenses. So for Steve, that's about $2,500. So $2,500 a month goes to his fixed expenses. And then you really want to make sure that you're saving, that you're investing. If you have your 401k through your employer, you got matching with that. Always maximize the matching out, and then anything else that you can do or set up. We're going to do another whole episode on investing, so I'm not going to get into the weeds on that there, but somewhere around 10% with that. 10% in your savings, where you can really break up, like what you were just saying. What are Steve's hobbies? For me, obviously, with golf being one, I have tournament entry fees that are pretty regular throughout the year. So throw in some of that 10% into, there's great things like I know of Ally is a great online high yield savings account. And then Capital One 360 is also another great online savings account. And it lets you kind of create buckets or categories to break up your savings, so you can actually see how much you're bringing into like your emergency fund or your golf tournament entry bucket. So you can really map those things out. And then something we'll touch on in a few minutes here is that guilt-free spending area. So about 20%. And again, that's just like a good baseline. I think that's a great way to start categorizing. And obviously, if your rent or mortgage is through the roof, depending on where you live, your percentages are going to look a little different, right? And so trying to map those out the best is, I think that's just a good being able to assign some number values to give people a good baseline. Like, okay, if I'm spending 80% of my money is going towards fixed expenses, maybe I should look for a new insurance company or switch cell phone carriers.
Find a different apartment. Something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, now on top of all of that stuff, so I think those are great numbers to have, and that's a great way to split up your money if you're able to save month to month. But for a guy like Steve or an individual like Steve, if you're just out of college, odds are you probably have student loan debt. So I think it's important to touch on how to manage that or how to handle that before we get into guilty spending. Mm-hmm. And from what I would recommend to a guy like Steve is, in a moment where you're trying to tackle any debt, always want to tackle the smallest debt first. If the only debt he has is student loans, then he needs to tackle that. And the best way that he can do it without making more money year over year is to temporarily stop investing or putting money into his retirement accounts through work. That's going to give him immediate cash flow that he can put into paying debt, and that'll help increase his cash flow month to month and get his debt paid down faster. Now, that's just an option. There's tons of different ways that you can do that without having to stop investing in your company retirement fund. But that's actually one thing that Dave Ramsey recommends is, like, if you have small debts, if you have student loan debt and then some other small debts, a great way to attack those small debts quickly is to stop investing in retirement savings through work and use that money to pay off that debt. Because it's a decent amount for most workplaces, because it's usually a percentage of your overall pay, or it's a set value or something like that. So making sure that Steve or whoever is setting themselves up to be able to tackle that debt while still saving money and being able to spend it on everything that they want, I think that's important to manage.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say about the managing a student loan debt is, I think you can go about it, two different ways. Like, I know that's what Dave Ramsey kind of talks about. Mm-hmm. But I think when we do the investing episode, we'll kind of go into a little bit more depth on this, or at least I would like to. But I personally don't think that it's a great idea to not invest to pay off a student loan debt, because it's so large. Again, it depends on what the size is. Yep. And it depends on the other debt you have. Your student loan debt and your mortgage are probably going to be the smallest interest rate percentages that you have, especially in comparison to car loans, or definitely credit cards if you're carrying a balance or you already have credit card debt. And if you look at just market return rate alone, it's going to be probably a little bit higher than what your student loan percentage is. So as long as you're not defaulting on your student loans, because I mean, this is just what I personally do, is I just pay because my balance is large and it's a private loan. It's not through the government. So good old Uncle Joe isn't going to absolve that one. It's the best. The way I've always looked at investing is the best time to do it is today if you haven't started, because if you wait, and what I want to do for when we talk about investing is I want to actually run a couple of numbers on this. But if I were to stop completely investing to pay down student loans faster, I would probably miss out somewhere in the ballpark of, I don't know, at least 8, maybe 10 or more years of investing, which
good point.
When we run some numbers there, I know in the Tony Robbins seminar I was just watching this past week, he gave an example of a guy that started investing $300 a month at 19 years old, and he stopped when he was 27. And then there was another guy that started investing $300 a month at age 27 all the way until he was 65. So way more years of actually investing.
Mm-hmm.
And at age 65, when they both retired, the guy that only invested for 8 years, but started when he was 19, had like $1.8 million, figuring, a 7 or 8% return.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that had invested for almost 3 times as long had 1.2. So
okay,
when you're looking at in my opinion, if you can do anything within your ability to continue to maximize at least the matching that your employer is giving you, because it's free money. And again, like if you're pausing investing for 10 plus years so you can pay student loans down faster, that's crazy. But that's, again, my balance. Like I have a lot, not everybody has as much as I do. So it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but that's the second option.
Yeah, I think, and that's the big caveat to that whole like putting investments on hold is if you're going to do that, that should only be a short-term solution, because if you do that for too long, that can definitely screw up your long-term money-making potential, and that's not really worth it at the end of the day. So that's
the other quick thing to mention there too is it also just plays into what kind of person you are and what your money mindset is. If you like can't handle having debt, even if the only debt you have is student loans, but like you can't physically like fucking operate your life.
Yeah.
Either you need to get that looked at, or you pay your debt off. If that's going to make you just feel better, because at the end of the day, it's what makes you feel more in control. It makes you feel better. So again, it's like you said, it's definitely not a one size fits all, or there's the best way to do it. But each person's specific.
And hopefully everyone's getting that idea by listening to what we're saying, because the only thing that is cookie cutter about budgeting is that we're all using the same numbers. Everyone's budget and the details of the budget are going to be slightly different based on each person. So we're only trying to give some examples on a random guy named Steve, and hopefully some of these examples will relate to you. And I think in talking about feeling of a budget, and if you feel that way about debt, I think it's important to touch on the feeling of guilty spending, or at least understand that idea a little bit more, because a lot of people do feel somewhat trapped about the idea of budgeting. And I think it's very important for people to not feel that, and to realize that a budget should empower you to spend money where you want. And it is okay to spend money for yourself. Now, obviously you can't go overboard. You have to live within your means, right? So like, you can't just think that, well, I feel bad today, so I'm going to buy this Rolex watch that's worth 15 grand, and you make 1,500 bucks every 2 weeks. Like that's not going to add up, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely boundaries to stuff like that, but I do think it's important that everyone spends money on themselves because I think it ends up being a mental health thing. Like you just are happy and comfortable with the way you're living life, and being able to spend money on yourself is a big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was telling you a little bit earlier before we started recording. Yeah, my wife Megan and I, we were having a good finance conversation last night, and one of the things that came up is when we were talking about this guilt-free spending. What I had mentioned, around 20% of your take home is a decent starting point if you can. And because she was seeing that she was spending not like a ton, but she would get food a lot at work. Like we wouldn't have what she wanted to bring for lunch or dinner in the fridge, so she would just spend money eating out at work. And I mean that I wish I worked in a freaking medical facility where there's like Chipotle and like actually halfway decent food options and not just like McDonald's
Yeah.
or other nonsense. But she was feeling guilty about that. And it's like, I really need to cut back on that. And I asked her, I was like, okay, do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy being able to eat good food, not having to make something previous and bring it and store it somewhere, and then you're reheating food and it's just whatever? Do you enjoy the process of going out and getting something different all the time? Whatever. And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, I enjoy that. And I was like, well, then don't feel guilty about it. The whole purpose of being able to have this guilt-free spending area is, like you said, do what you enjoy, because it turns out there's probably going to be other areas that other people spend a lot of money on that you don't as an individual. Yep. So it's not I'm going to buy everything I want, but like for me, I enjoy just tech gear, especially podcast gear, but also golf equipment, little training aids or cool little workout things for the basement. But I don't really like eating out that much. I'd rather be able to cook my own food. So I don't really spend a whole lot going out, but I'll spend a little bit more on, those items. And so the whole reason I bring that up is the only way that you can have this guilt-free mentality, or the way that you can and not feel bad that you're not saving that money or you're not putting it towards a debt or something else, is that you already have those other bases covered. You're already sending somewhere around that 10% to your savings. You're already sending that 10% to your investment accounts. You're already taking care of yourself for the long term. So there's no reason why you should feel guilty about buying lunch somewhere or spending a couple extra bucks on a nicer coat or bag or something. Right.
Yeah.
But that's only when you have those previous bases covered.
And that's the key part that we need to remind Steve here is your guilty spending category is basically what you have left after all of that other stuff is paid for. Yep. I would not recommend anyone sit down every month with however much money they have and automatically take like 20% off the top for guilty spending. Like that is not going to work. So that guilty spending is totally okay if it's done in that way. So then I want anyone to spend money on whatever they feel like they want. Like it's free country, you're free to do that. And again, like you don't want to, like, I wouldn't want Steve or anyone else to feel like they're in jail. And if you can't spend money on what you want, that's got to feel something like jail. So,
right.
Yeah, definitely make sure you spend money on that type of stuff.
Yeah. Cause I mean, your budget or your conscious spending plan is not designed to imprison you. It's not to be able to tell you what you can't spend money on or what you can't have. It's the exact opposite. It's like, what do I have and where can I use it? And it's the whole thing. I mean, this seems like eons ago, but when we talked about how do you live a rich life, right? You're planning what your rich life looks like. And if your rich life looks like being able to spend time with family and friends, going on vacations or going out places, but lacking in other areas, like that's what your budget is going to help you accomplish. It's going to help you figure out what you can do to help you live that rich life. It's not meant to just leave you in four walls of Excel on your computer screen border saying like, man, I can't do anything.
And to that point, I feel like we also have to mention to Steve and everyone else listening that you don't have to have a spreadsheet. You don't have to have everything set up and looking all nice in Excel or like done in an app or something like that. That's not really, really necessary. I think the only thing you need to understand is how much money you have coming in every month and how much you have going out. And really, you can figure that out just by looking at like your checking account savings or your savings account, your checking account statements. Your savings account statements. So I don't want anyone to feel like they can't get into budgeting because it has to be on a spreadsheet. No, it doesn't. Again, if you just have a solid understanding of where your money is going, I think that's a good basis to start off from. You can still get all your bills paid. You can still make sure you have enough money month to month. And if you look at your statements and you see that, in month one, you had $5,000 in your checking account. And then in month 4, you have like 2,900 and everything's been paid and everything like that. Okay. But maybe you spent more money on maybe that guilty spending stuff. And then you can get into the nitty gritty and figure out where that money went. But if you see your checking account go down and your other accounts aren't going up, like your savings or something, you probably should look at where your money is going and figure that out. But you don't have to set a spreadsheet to budget.
No,
I think a great tool is the envelope. The envelope thing.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it seems a little bit prehistoric or archaic at this point
do people know what envelopes are?
Or what like physical cash is. But I mean I did it for a little bit and it was a little bit too much time for me to set up and I didn't get as much value out of doing it. But I mean, you can set up an envelope system like Nico just mentioned, instead of having this spreadsheet where you just have a bunch of envelopes and you label them, like restaurant and bar or gas, groceries, and you get cash out of the bank. You put it in the envelope. And then when there's I literally was just saying envelope because that's how you said it. And I've never pronounced that word that way.
Really?
Yeah, because I just said envelope there, and I'm like, did I said freaking envelope? Wow. Okay. Anyway,
my bad.
Jeez.
Sorry.
Yeah, what the hell was I talking about?
I don't want to say it now because I'm gonna ruin everything.
And envelopes. No, so when that cash is gone in the envelope, like you're done. And sure, you can rob Peter to pay Paul and scooch over money from groceries to go out and get drinks with your friends again. But then when you go to the grocery store the next time and you can't buy all the things you want, I mean, that's just a good real way to feel the push pull of, do I actually need to buy this or not? So I've always seen and would recommend that system to people that impulse buy a lot, or they have very little planning. Like if you don't write a list when you go to the grocery store, like you're going to buy a bunch of shit you don't need or use. So it really makes you a little bit more conscious and feel like what you're actually spending, because you are physically giving cash to somebody and not just swiping a card. And if you're not checking those bank statements or your credit card statements, you're going to be surprised. But when you get ready to head to the grocery store and you look in that envelope and there's only $40 left, you know how much you have for the rest of the month. So that's another option. I think it's fantastic. It, like I said, for me, it was the act of going to get it out of the bank and stuff everything. I mean, it wasn't super laborious, but
when there is,
I enjoyed the technology a little bit more.
Oh, same. And there is actually some statistics that I think Dave Ramsey mentions about the act of using cash versus a card. I think it's something like you'd spend 12% more money when you use a credit card versus cash. Mm-hmm. So setting up those envelopes it's a great way to get that physical action in the process of budgeting and spending money. Because like people do spend more if it's just a card. It's just a subconscious thing that happens in there. So that's another great system to use for Steve or anyone else that is getting started with a budget.
Yep. I would say too, at this point in Steve's budgeting journey, after he's kind of figured out some of the areas where his money's going and what he typically spends in those areas, finding the areas where there's some leakage, where maybe he's spending a little too much or needs to spend more elsewhere and has to cut another area. I think a great way, at least that I started to think about that, is instead of looking at all of the categories of where you're spending money and trying to, nickel and dime 2, 3, 4% off of each of those categories, finding your 2, 3 highest percentages of where that money is going that aren't your rent or mortgage, really. Like, so example for me and Megan, it was grocery store and cask. Wow, this envelope thing really has fucked my whole speech up. Oh my gosh. Grocery stores and Costco or your other warehouse club, and then just going on dates or eating out, restaurants, whatever. Those were our 2 biggest areas of spending that I know that we can really reduce. And so if you can find those 2 or 3 areas that might have 20 to 30% of where that money is going, and reducing that whole amount by 10-ish is going to be a lot more impactful, because when you add that up over those couple categories, that can be up to 30% in reduction of just tackling 3 areas as opposed to trying to reduce everything by 5.
Yeah.
And a great way, just give you a quick example here that I did. So for grocery stores and Costco stuff, I don't really have a huge, we use Mint for tracking our overall expenses. It's not the best app I've seen, but it ballparks everything pretty nicely. So I don't really do an Excel spreadsheet all the time, but to tackle this, I set one up specifically for grocery stores and Costco trips to figure out how frequently I'm going, what I'm spending on certain items, if they're on sale or not, to see what savings are. And then the important thing with that is then I can go back and look at these and see, all right, did I actually consume this whole product before it went bad? Did I not actually eat it? Did I buy something because it was on sale and didn't utilize it? Or it was a buy one, get one free, and I only used one. So there's other ways to figure out those habits that you have in these problem areas. So by tackling 1, 2, 3 of your high spending areas, I think you're going to get definitely a greater yield of reduction to be able to move some extra to free that money up around.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the last thing I wanted to mention, when people are thinking about budgeting, I wanted to mention this mindset. If you don't have a budget yet, if you're like Steve and you're fresh out of college or whatever your situation is, you don't have a budget, just think about getting it built first. Think about an engineer making a car for the very first time. They just wanted to make it built. After it was built, we can focus on fine tuning, using different materials, using different strategies, whatever it may be. But get something built that works for you. And then later on, like you just said, you can go into the nitty gritty and get really fine detailed with your grocery expenses or your miscellaneous or whatever it may be. So you can see how you can save money to use in other areas.
Yep. Great point. And so I'll probably end up setting up another spreadsheet for eating out and things like that to be able to nail that one down too. But the last, at least the last sort of area or tip that I wanted to throw out there for Steve and everybody else is wanted to reference. I mentioned a book earlier in the episode here, and I picked this up. I think it was like a few days after our first recording of this series, and finished it within the week. And the book's called "I Will Teach You to Be Rich" by Ramit Sethi. Hopefully I said his name right, and from like first glance at the title, I was like, man, this is probably going to be some tax evasion, some high level, like crazy scheme thing. And quite honestly, just like it says on the front cover, it says no guilt, no excuses, no BS, just a 6-week program that works. And I found this book to be extremely valuable. And he goes through, literally it's a 6-week plan. It just tackles one area, starting with optimizing your credit cards to then beating the banks, where he just talks about what accounts to open. And I mentioned those online high yield savings accounts. Jesus. Like Ally and that Capital One 360, getting your a checking account that you can have unlimited online transfers from. Then he talks about investing, developing your conscious spending plan, saving while sleeping. A really interesting chapter about the myth of financial expertise, which was very nice.
It's gonna be
and just kind of some closing thoughts with things about your rich life, how to maintain and grow your system, and things like that. So
nice.
This book is like a field manual almost. And so I would highly recommend that for anybody honestly anybody, because I thought I had some decent some decent personal finance knowledge, and this made it more actionable. It wasn't just like all these knowledge bubbles or thought bubbles kind of going around my head. But I wanted to bring this up because one of the systems that he talks about is how to set up your finance or your personal finance system with automation. And so I just have started to do that. So I'm kind of working through it. But basically what he does is you can set up these reoccurring withdrawals from your online savings account that you have set up, and another investment account that you would set up outside of what your company plan is, because that automatically comes out of your paycheck. And just having all your bills be on your credit card to maximize your rewards from that, as long as you pay it off. I mean, that's obviously you talked about that last time. Otherwise, this system goes downhill real fast if you're not paying that off. But so you have that automatically come out of your checking account, that credit card bill, usually your utility bills you can't put on your credit card, or mortgage or whatever, rent. And then you just have these automatic withdrawals going. So for example, your paycheck comes in on, mine comes in on the last day of every month. So I get paid monthly, which I haven't figured out if I like that yet or not, but that comes in on the last day of the month. And then I have transfers set up on the 3rd of the following month, to where those percentages I've set up go to savings account, go to the other investment account that I set up. It's already coming out to go to the company 401k plan. And then the rest is in the checking account that goes to the credit card bill, and then my student loan payment. And then kind of whatever's left is what my guilt-free spending area is. So having that set up on automation or automatically just made a shitload of sense to me, because again, it's like the 85% rule we talked at the top of the episode. It's not super perfect. Like, yeah, there's might be some pitfalls here with technology sometimes, but when you have that set up, like, you're just putting, like, that money is just already going there. Like, you're not having to, oh shit, did I remember to throw money over into the savings account this month? It's just taking a lot of what overwhelmed me when I was starting to set up some finance system or knowledge or whatever it was, and it just made it automatic. And so I would highly recommend everybody check that book out, or at least experiment with how you can automate some of this stuff, because the less that you have to do at the end of the day, I feel like is just going to be better. I mean, you told me a great example with your budgeting spreadsheet on how you tackle it. You do just a small amount daily as opposed to spend 6 hours at the end of the month, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's another great point to bring up in terms of managing a budget. Anyone may have to do a lot of work up front if they don't have a budget set up already, but you're not going to have to do that every day. So if you set up the budget for the first time, or if Steve sets it up for the first time and it takes him 2 hours, the idea is that he doesn't have to spend 2 hours on his budget ever again. Those 2 hours to create it should be the longest that he has to budget. And in an ideal world, once you've gotten the hang of things, maybe he's budgeting once a day or every 2 days or 3 days. And so, like, I didn't budget for the past 3 or 4 days, but I just looked at my statement just now, and then I was able to fill out everything that I hadn't put in for the last 3 or 4 days, which wasn't a whole lot. And so it took 3 minutes. So that's another aspect of this. It's that type of stuff with automation and setting up your budget a certain way and maintaining it a certain way. All that is, at least to me, is peace of mind. You don't have to think about this shit. It's sent, it's automated. You already know that all the numbers are in your budget. Whatever it is, it's one less thing to think about. And that's what I would urge Steve to do. Set up his budget and his finances in a way that doesn't bog his mind down and make him concerned about everything all the time. And I think that's what I would recommend for everyone. Figure out where you're spending your money. And that's our duel of the day today. Figure out where you're spending your money and set up a basic budget. If that's the envelope system or envelope system, do that. If it's something in Excel, do that. Whatever works for you, just set something up. And I think after Steve or after you have done this budget setup, I think anyone who does that is going to feel a little bit better about where they're at with their money.
Definitely. Yeah, we're putting Steve on automation.
Yeah.
That's where, since we control his life, that's what we're doing.
You're doing it, Steve.
Exactly.
Whether you like it or not.
Yes. So I think we'll wrap that up. We'll wrap this one up here with that. So thanks everyone for sticking with us here. I know this finance education or all this stuff is pretty dense. We're trying to make it fun.
Yeah,
it's definitely fun when I can't fucking speak. So that's
my bad on that.
Pronounce words correctly. But yeah, appreciate everyone sticking around for that. So stay tuned for the next episode where we are going to get into some investing information. We're going to set Steve up for success for the long term with some investment accounts and whatnot, and give you guys another duel today to stay on pace with Steve. You don't want to have less money at the end of your career than Steve does, right?
No,
especially because this guy is we don't
not
know much
real.
about it. Yeah. Exactly. But be sure to check out the website, subscribe there. Again, dueltoday.com and at Duel Today on social media platforms, so you don't miss when that episode comes out. And to wrap up here from the guru himself, Dave Ramsey, great quote on this. He said, "A budget isn't about restricting what you can spend. it gives you permission to spend without guilt or regret. So we'll catch you guys here next time on Duel the Day. And as always, begin the duel, win the day. Peace.